He's planning a second meeting with his Russian counterpart soon after Friday's high-stakes Alaska summit, this time with the Ukrainian president at the table. The US leader has repeatedly vowed to bring about an end to the war, but has so far made scant progress towards brokering a peace deal. Without elaborating, Trump said Russia would face very severe consequences if Putin did not agree to end the war. He made the remarks after attending a virtual meeting with European leaders, including Emmanuel Macron and the Ukrainian president, who told the group that Putin was bluffing about seeking peace.
Several important messages came out of this exchange. The first is that President Trump was clear that the American will is to obtain a ceasefire at this meeting in Alaska. The second thing, which the US president was very clear on, is that the questions arising on Ukrainian territorial matters can only be negotiated and will only be negotiated by the Ukrainian president. The third thing is the link which must be maintained between any territorial concessions and security guarantees provided to Ukraine.
I told the US president and all of our European colleagues that Putin is bluffing. He's trying to put pressure before the meeting in Alaska along all parts of the Ukrainian front. Russia is trying to show that it can occupy all of Ukraine. Of course, this is their desire. I told my colleagues, the US president and our European friends, that Putin definitely does not want peace. He wants the occupation of our country, and we all really understand that. Putin will not be able to deceive anyone. We need further pressure for peace, and not only American, but also European sanctions.
Well, for more on what's at stake ahead of this summit on Friday, we're joined by Scott Lucas. He's a professor of US and international politics at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin. Scott, thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. So Donald Trump then, he's being urged not to unilaterally strike a peace deal with Russia to end the war in Ukraine on Friday. What do you think he's actually going to do at that summit?
What Donald Trump has just said in the past hour is that he is going in the expectation that this will just be a first meeting. In other words, that he won't be agreeing to any deals, he won't be agreeing to the Kremlin's terms, and that there will then be a second meeting, which will include Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky. So that seems to indicate some success by the Europeans to pull him back from simply falling into Vladimir Putin's pocket on Friday. Similarly, the White House has been emphasizing that he is going there in listening mode. In addition to that, what Trump has said is he has repeated that the necessity is for a ceasefire, which again is the Ukrainian European priority. And he has said that if Russia does not negotiate, there will be serious consequences. Now, that's all well and good. But we know that Donald Trump listens to the last person in the room. So will he maintain this line on Friday when the Kremlin has its opportunity to try to spin him, to try to manipulate him? And probably equally important, which other officials will be there to try to ensure that Trump doesn't flip back towards Russia? Will there be a number of officials in that meeting, or will it be, as in the past, just Trump and Putin one-on-one with only translators?
Yeah, and we saw last time they met back in 2018, Donald Trump appeared to be completely dazzled by Vladimir Putin when they met. So that is a real danger in European eyes and in Ukrainian eyes as well, heading into this summit.
I think you've heard that from every European leader this week of consequence. You've heard it from Emmanuel Macron. You played some of his statements today after the call with Trump. You've heard it from Friedrich Merz of Germany. You heard it from Donald Tusk of Poland, Giorgia Meloni of Italy, the UK's Keir Starmer. You know, leader after leader has been expressing the line, as Tusk puts it, of hopes but also concerns. They know that Trump is unpredictable. They know in 2018 he caved in to Putin and even chose the Russians over U.S. intelligence services. Now it is 7 years later. It is also a Trump who has been very frustrated in recent weeks that Russia will not accept a ceasefire and that it is killing Ukraine's civilians, something he mentioned again today. So he may have a different attitude here. But yes, I think we cannot assume that that this very good work, excellent work by Vladimir Zelensky and the Europeans has locked Trump in to taking a line for Kyiv security. There's still the danger that he can be swung on the day.
And despite also what's happening, this kind of pressure that's being placed on Donald Trump, why do you think, Scott, Russia would actually agree to a ceasefire when it is actually, even this week, making advances on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, Russia's not going to agree to a ceasefire. That's not why they played their last card, which is this face-to-face with Donald Trump. What they're doing is two things. One is they were on the defensive because of Trump's threat of not only sanctioning Moscow, but their trading partners like China and India. So they needed to push that threat back, and they have done so. The deadline came and went for those sanctions last Friday. Now they want to get Trump to repeat their ultimatum, including the seizure of more than 20% of Ukraine, keeping the rest of the country weak and demilitarized. But, and let's be cautious here, Russia's not making rapid advances in the East. There's been some media overreaction to some Russian probing operations in the East. They have not, after more than a year, taken a town in Donetsk they tried to attack. That's just one example. But the Kremlin is going to try to present that if there is not a settlement, we will conquer Ukraine militarily, and they hope that Trump will give way to that PR line.
And do you think, though, at the end of the day, it is inevitable that Ukraine is going to be forced to cede some of its territory?
Well, I think what's interesting, and I've known this actually for months, but we've had Vladimir Zelensky come out and effectively confirm this, is that the ceasefire will involve the freezing of the front lines. Now, that means in the short term, Russia will hold the territory that it occupies in parts of the east, Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, and in parts of the south, Zaporizhia and Kherson. But there are two key lines here. The first is that Russian occupation will not be legally recognized as Russian annexation of the territories. And secondly, there will be this ongoing support for Ukraine to build itself up politically and economically. We will be in a situation similar to that of Germany in the Cold War, that while some territory, East Germany, was under Soviet influence and was so for 40 years, the rest of Germany was supported economically, politically, and militarily, where it became a founding member of the EEC, now the European Union, a member of NATO, and one of the leading countries on the continent. That, I think, is what Ukraine envisages, that they'll have to accept short-term occupation, but they will be part of Europe, a Europe which actually will be progressing and be stronger as Russia struggles economically and holds territory which basically it has burned to the ground.
What then should Donald Trump be focusing on as he heads into these talks, and what will he in fact be focusing on during the talks, do you think?
If I was advising Donald Trump, and I'm not, I would say check your ego at the door. Listen, don't overreact. But we know that Donald Trump doesn't check his ego at the door. Trump has very little knowledge of what happens in Ukraine. He has very little knowledge of what happens in Russia. He's not really a specialist on military or diplomatic measures. He is a politician who responds to his interest and to his feelings. So the hope here is that Europe and Vladimir Zelensky have gotten Trump focused on his feelings, that Russia is the aggressor, and that even after Vladimir Putin does his best to say that Russia is the victim here, Donald Trump will remember, no, after almost 42 months of a full-scale invasion, Russia is the aggressor.
And do you think whatever is agreed on Friday, as you say, it kind of depends on who the last person is that Trump has been speaking to in terms of what might influence him, but whatever is agreed, how likely is it that it will lead to a lasting outcome?
Well, this is important. Nothing can be agreed on Friday. Nothing can be agreed on Friday because even if Donald Trump accepted all of Russia's ultimata, to carve up Ukraine, to keep much of Ukraine weak, you can't make that deal because Ukraine's not there and its European partners are not there. And that's the point they've been making throughout the week. So if the worst case scenario comes out, that Donald Trump folds, as he did in 2018 to Vladimir Putin, even if Donald Trump goes back to insulting Vladimir Zelensky, This will not be a deal. It simply brings us back to where we were earlier this year, where given Trump's cutoff of assistance to Kyiv, Europe and the rest of the international community had to step up its support for Ukraine. And that, I think, should be our focus. Do not expect a deal on Friday. The best we hope for is that we get Ukraine and Europe taking the initiative for a ceasefire. But in a worst case option, this is not lost. This is not something that can be imposed on Ukraine and its partners.
Scott, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks again for joining us on the programme. That is Scott Lucas, Professor of US and International Politics at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin.